I'm Simon King, and this is What's Wrong. I don't know if you've been following the Facebook group, What's Wrong with Simon King Facebook group, or if you've been following us on Twitter at WWWSK Podcast or on our TikTok. But if you have, you probably know what I'm going to talk about today. It's just me today because I've got some episodes with guests coming up, but I wanted to get back into it by talking to you about what's been going on. So without further ado, if you're not aware, I think you know what I'm going to talk about. If you are aware, at the end of October last year, my dad died. So it was rather difficult. Not just the actual emotional, as you can imagine, it's quite devastating. But it was also timing-wise very inconvenient of him. If he'd timed it better, because what happened was he died. And for anyone interested, because I know people he was 77 and he had a massive heart attack, a series of massive heart attacks, which is ironic because his heart had been tested very recently and it was, his heart itself was very, very healthy. But it was, they're not sure. It was a descending artery, got clogged, and it doesn't really matter. I was on tour. I was on the road when I got the call from my mother. And my father's health had not been fantastic the last couple of years. So when she called, I was in a ferry lineup with a couple of other comedians, great dudes. And she called to let me know, and I assumed it was just a regular, he's back in the hospital with something else. And unfortunately, it was much more serious. And so we were in Bowen Island that night, I believe. No, Seychelles. We'd been Bowen Island the night before. We went to Seychelles. And that night was a very difficult night. They took him to hospital. He coded on the way. And then when he got to Royal Columbian, which is a fantastic... If you're going to have heart problems in Vancouver, if you're going to have heart problems in British Columbia, check out Royal Columbian Hospital. The best heart specialists in the country. They're very good. They're very, very good people. But... you know what? You can't undo years of damage with one miracle surgery. That's not how it works. So he had an operation that night. It looked positive, and then it was very clear by the time I was coming home from the road, which was the Sunday. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm not some sort of cold, heartless bastard who's just like, oh, well, fuck my dad, I gotta work. He very much would have. That was very much who he was. He very much put performing ahead of it. In fact, when his father died, he had called his brother and said something. His brother said, why come home? There's nothing you can do. And so I wasn't really of that mentality, but there really literally was nothing I could do. And the best place for me was performing. And as it turns out, those shows were fantastic because I had a lot to work through. Came back on the Sunday, went to the hospital. It was very clear by the time we got to my mother's house, or my parents' house, my mom's house. Well, not even now because she's moved, but my mom's house, that it wasn't. We were done. And so he never experienced any pain. He didn't wake up. He was just, kind of like flipping off a light. Like, when you turn off an old car, and it doesn't know to stop running for a little bit? It was like that. It was like the timing was fucked. So anyway, went to the hospital, saw him, said our goodbyes and everything, and then that was kind of that. And if anyone wonders how comedians' brains work, like literally, my mother and my father were together for 54 years, so it wasn't just some sort of fling. When she came, we said our goodbyes, and they'd taken him off the medication. It was essentially some medication just keeping him alive, but it wasn't, And she came out, and we were all kind of standing there, kind of somber, as you would imagine, not exactly a party atmosphere. And this is exactly how comedians' brains work. Like within, 2 seconds of her walking into the waiting room, she's standing there, and I'm like, so do you want me to put the dating apps on your phone now, or do you want me to? And I do think the nurse didn't find that funny, but the rest of us did. So fucking, that's how we process. We went. The hardest part about that, the hardest part about it all was telling my son what was happening, because although they were not super close, they were close, but not super close because COVID got in the way and a lot of that. Because my son's only about 6. There was the weird realization that I'm going to put him in the position I'm in one day. One day he is going to have to tell his child, if he has any, that their grandfather has died. And up until this point, And if you've listened to the podcast, if you've seen my comedy, and if you know me personally, which some of you do, you know that mortality has actually been fascinating to me. It's never really been something that I've been terribly afraid of. I have this weird obsessive compulsive bend of believing that like something is wrong all the time, but that's not necessarily about mortality. Actually, I see death as quite the release. It's quite freeing, you know. Then you're done. It's really, as we found out, it's very hard for Visa to collect from you when you're fucking dead. So you don't have to worry about that shit. But what did occur to me all of a sudden was how my mortality will affect particularly him. Because when you have a child, usually they're the most important person ever in your life, that ever will be or ever was or ever can be. And it doesn't mean you don't care for your partner or your family or anything else. It's just that child all of a sudden needs you. And I think that's something that has never occurred to me before, because I would be lying if I said that I hadn't been suicidal in my life, and I've never actually attempted it, which is good, because I'm very much one of those people where I don't think I ever got. I think I just always backed myself out of that corner, got myself out of the corner logically before that ever went down. But there were many times when I got really, close, and my brain was like, "This is something," and consistent thoughts over weeks of like, "This is something we should do. This is something we should do. This is the most logical solution." And yet now, looking at it now, I'm realizing that is because I'm 45 years old, right? And my father was 77. I've had him for a lot longer than a lot of people do. And I know there's probably people listening to this podcast who either never had fathers or they lost their fathers young. I had a friend who lost his father when he was 18, and it destroyed his life. It just really damaged his life. And to the point where he ended up taking his own life. And so I looked at that, and I look at this kind of interesting ultimate perspective that you get, because the only thing you're absolutely sure of is that you will one day not be anymore. You're going to die, whether it's however it happens, whether it's in some sort of a freak banana accident, or if it's if you decide to strap dynamite to your chest and take out a whatever the fuck it is. Like, I don't know what you're gonna do, and please don't do that last one. The banana thing, I don't know. I mean, if you're gonna do it, post it so we can all see. But the one thing that is assured is that you will one day not be. Whether it's a plane crash or cancer, something is going to get you. And like Gloria Estefan said, the rhythm is going to get you. But it's been years, and it still hasn't. I did actually tweet that once at her. I tweeted years ago, Gloria Estefan said the rhythm is going to get you. I got all these noise-canceling headphones, built a soundproof bunker, and the rhythm never came, Gloria. It never came. And she tweeted back, "that you know of," with a little monocle eye emoji. And it was one of the greatest moments of my life. So anyway, the assuredness of your mortality is a really interesting thing when you're actually faced with it. Because as you get older, like when you're young, most of the people you know are alive, hopefully, and they will be for quite a while. I lost my grandmother about 15 years ago, and I lost my grandfather about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, but these are things that you expect because these people are in their 80s and 90s and stuff. And then one day, all of a sudden, your parents are that age. And so my father, the interesting thing is his side of the family lives quite long. I think his brother was 88 when he died, and his sister is still alive, and she's 93. And so I expected fully that he would be around for longer. And I think because of that, I had not processed the coming mortality. And then when faced with it over that strange 2.5, 3 day period where you know what's coming, the sword of Damocles is hanging, but you just won't admit it. You can't admit it, because if you admit it, then it's almost like it happens. I used to have this weird thing where I believed that if I went and saw people in hospital, it would mean the end of them. And that's part of the OCD magical thinking thing. And the one good thing is I was kind of sure that my dad was already pretty much gone, so I could go visit him, right? Because it wasn't really on me. You know what I mean? Wouldn't that be crazy if it, like, the doctor's like, he's making a remarkable recovery, and you're like, hey, I brought flowers, and like, oh my God, it's flatlining, you know? Like, I'm gonna fuck you up for life. Oh my God, that'd be the worst. You'd be like, oh, my ears are realized. That's how much power doctors have. They could have been like, Mr. King, your father was doing fine. He was actually recovering. And then I don't know what happened, but right after your visit, it just went downhill. Anyway, that's something to think about. Just move on. Just fuck you over for life. But yeah, so the realization, the thinking of your own mortality. I remember a few days after, I was putting my son down to bed, and I was lying on the floor next to his bed, as sometimes I sing him to sleep, or I sing him to sleep pretty much all the time because I'm a softie. And I was lying there, and I was just like that moment where he's almost falling asleep, but you don't want to get up and move, because then he'll be like, "Where are you going?" And so I'm lying there, and I'm thinking to myself, all of a sudden, this flood of mortality hits me. This flood, the idea of not me, but what happens after me, what comes after me. And as an atheist, as someone who finds great comfort in the nothingness of it, I normally just go, well, that's it. Like, it's not my problem. I won't be here, which is true. But then it's no longer a you problem; it's a them problem. But then you also think, like, your instinct to protect your child particularly kicks in, and you go, well, how can I stop me from hurting him? But you can't, because the better you are as a parent, the more you love your child and they love you, the more damage you're doing. It's a very strange Chinese finger trap of a thing. The more you care, the more invested you are, the more plugged into life. And then that comes down to that thing of, like, would you rather have a certain amount of years of that kind of love and joy and happiness, and then end up paying a price for it, which we all pay? It's not like there was a way out of this for anybody, except for vampires. But it's like there's that kind of equation, and your life comes down to these weird mathematics of, like, what am I ultimately doing here? What is the purpose of what I am? And death, if you're lucky enough to have not had a lot of it in your life, I'm very happy for you. I've been quite lucky. I haven't had that much loss. I've had some. I've lost a lot of sort of friends and comedians and acquaintances, but family, I never had a really big family, so there's only so many bullets in the chamber, so to speak, in terms of, like, how many people you're going to run out of. There's limited ammunition of relatives. But unfortunately, as you get older, it's just, the way of things, it just continues. And now they say having a child makes you realize how old you are, because you see them grow, but also, watching people age and die because when people are, like, in their 50s and even 60s and stuff, they don't seem to age that rapidly, because they're like, well, the same at 64 that they were at 61. It's not that big of a difference, unless there's something chronic, But then all of a sudden, when they get north of sort of 75, 80 years old, depending on the person, a lot of people are not like this, but my father was particularly. As soon as he got sort of north of 72, he was not the same guy. He was clearly, my father was an interesting person. He was incredibly gifted musically. There was no question. He never had his IQ tested, but I would be shocked if it was less than the at least low genius range. He could hear a piece of music and then play it back to you, like, hear it once and then play it back to you, changed and added. He could pick out the instruments. He had that kind of brain. Great gifts come at cost. So there were some difficulties in terms of, like, he was a bit distant and not capable. He was a caring man. But there are times when communication, you need better communication, which is something that also I thought I had more time to do, because I just can't. But then that's on me, because I saw the writing on the wall, but I did not move forward in the necessary peacemaking I needed. And it's not like my father and I had a tumultuous relationship. It's not like we weren't close, because we were. We had a lot of closeness, which is particularly towards the end of his life, because I made an effort to reach out and to be in his life. The more after I had a child too, I think he softened. It was great to see him with my son and his other grandkids, to see that, like, connection that he had, and but it does make you realize that, like, this is coming. And so that all happened, and then I had to go on the road, and I was on the road, and I did this great the Hungry for Laughs comedy tour, which was fantastic, and it was a great tour, but it was exhausting, and I was emotionally exhausted, and because he died on the 23rd of October, and I was on the road first week of November, and so you're planes and tour buses and doing all the stuff you're doing, which is great. It's part of the job, and it probably helped a lot, but the whole time in the back of your head, it's not really processing, right? You're not really understanding what's happened here. Because my father was the kind of person that I would call, like, once every, sort of week. And when I was working on the trailer, when I was over at the house, I would see him all the time, and I was always glad to see him. But he was not a person that I call, like, I tend to call my mother pretty much every day, because we chat, we're very similar. My father was not communicative on the phone at all anyway. Like, he's one of those guys that towards the end of his life had a flip phone, because kept accidentally pocket dialing people. He was just not technologically savvy in that way. But so towards, I had to deal with that and to process that. So it was difficult. And so if you have a set that doesn't go as well, you're not as bulletproof as you were. And, by and large, the shows were fine, but there were just some situations that were essentially unwinnable. There's not much you could do. And so I didn't take it personally, but I did take it as like, this new weakness that I didn't have. And then we did a memorial for him, which was amazing to see how many lovely people came out, and there was lots of lovely things being said, and I hated every fucking second of it because it just didn't, it made it all real. You know what I mean? Like the reality of it. Pardon me, I'm going to take a drink of coffee if you're not watching this. And if you're not watching this, you could be watching this on YouTube. You could be watching me stare at the camera as opposed to just listening to me. But it's probably better to listen to this one, but I want to keep up the trend of putting it on our YouTube channel. But yeah, I kind of got through that, and then my parents had, before my father died, my parents had sold their house and were going to move, which was the last trip I took with him was to see some homes. We took a little ferry trip to go see some homes, and so the reality had set in that like. My parents had been living in that place for over 30 years, and it was time, which was also, my childhood home, my formative childhood home that I remember, the home I moved out of to move into the city. It was the home I was in when I became a comedian, the home I was in when I dropped out of high school, when I got through all of that shit that I went through, and so it was it had a weird. I did not like that house at all, but it had a connection, and so. We had to move everything. And my father was nothing if not a pack rat. And so he had doubles and triples and quadruples of tools and stuff. And that was hard because my father and I, I had reached out to do a project with him. He was a good carpenter and liked building things. And so for anyone who's listened, I think I've mentioned before that I did this resto mod on this camping trailer. And we got this thing that was essentially should have gone to the dump, and for some reason we got it. And we worked on it together, and he went and picked it out because I had seen the ad, and he went and got it, and we worked on it together, and it was a really good bonding time. And if you have an opportunity to do that with one of your loved ones that maybe you're not as close with, do that because those moments are necessary. I mean, I definitely feel so much greater for that. But so going through the tools was difficult, going through all those things. But we did get my mom moved. It was extremely exhausting. That's another reason I couldn't podcast. We had some podcasts in the can that I put out, but because we've also been having some studio issues, as you know. But I'll explain that at the end of this. So I had some podcasts in the can, but I just literally was too exhausted. I would wake up in the morning, and my lovely lady friend took, she was able to take over all of the getting our kids to school, picking them up and everything, and it was amazing. She was incredibly supportive. Everyone's been supportive, but that was just exhausting. I was just up. I was on the road. I was working all day physically. But then I think that also pushed me dealing with things down the line. And so now I had these shows where I didn't really deal with it. And then there's a certain amount of denial, and then I was on stage like 4 days after he died doing jokes about him, which the audience was not prepared for. I thought they were funny, but fucking. It was like people always want to know, when you say your dad died, people always want to know how. And so I like to fuck with them. I'm like, yeah, nobody saw it coming except for NASA. You know what I mean? Like, shit like that. I find it funny. But I'm also fucking weird. No, I'm not. That's not true. I'm me. I'm not weird. Maybe everyone else is weird. I don't know. No, it's the children that are wrong. Anyway, so we got my mom moved out, and then Christmas and everything, which, as you can imagine, was difficult because in the meantime, there was the anniversary of 40 years of moving to Canada, which was the end of November, and there's lots of stuff that just happened. My mother's birthday, my parents' anniversary, all this stuff happened at once. So I was like, you know what, we're not going to do this podcast. I just couldn't get my head around it. I barely, other than shows I was doing for work, I wasn't doing shows. I wasn't trying to, because I think that I was understanding that I needed to process this, and I didn't deal with it. I like bits, drips and drabs. And then, and also before all this too, we moved house as well, like a few weeks before all this happened. So it's been incredibly strange. And in that time, when my mother left that house, which was a weird experience. Unfortunately, I lost the place to keep the trailer, and I had to sell the trailer. So I lost that connection as well. So I will do another project. I will talk about it at some point. I don't know if I've mentioned it much on the podcast, but I was really proud of that thing. I was really glad at the time I had. But the actual physical thing itself, the physical trailer, was not really the value. The actual value was the time I spent with him. So, that was, but that was difficult. As you can imagine, it was really hard to watch that be taken away. And then his piano went and all the other stuff. And it's just, you get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, so how many things in my life are now so different than they were 3 months ago, 4 months ago? Because this was all like 6 weeks after he died. And then everything was just different. It was just different. It was just not the same. And then you realize you're not the same. And so trying to do anything work-related, basically what I figured out how to do was I would just post on TikTok. I could just post on TikTok and Instagram. That's all I could figure out to do. I just took some clips and I posted stuff, and I was like, I got to do something. And then I've done some shows, and the shows I've done have been great, and people have been so supportive. The outpouring, I did post about my father's death because I just had to, because I needed people to know why I wasn't working. And there's really a few times in your life you get to say, I'm fucking off the menu for a bit because I can't handle it. This is one of those times. And people have been incredibly supportive about it. But just getting through it and realizing that I'm not through it. It's months now. It's almost like it gets worse because the realization kicks in, right? You're not just going to call him and ask him a dumb question anymore just to talk to him. A question you know the answer to, just to talk to him. You're not going to see the accomplishments that you're going to have, or your child, and then that makes you feel like anything that you accomplish now is somehow worthless. It's not. But it makes you feel like it doesn't have the same value. Like, it just takes, the best explanation is, it takes the wind out of your sails. It just slows you down. It just makes you more cautious and more worried and more unsure of yourself. Even things like, I never get sick. I never really get sick. And yet, I guess grief suppresses your immune system to the point where I was sick for 3 weeks. I mean, that's just not me, but I just couldn't get my head around it. I was just on the road, and I got sick, and I got sick. Got sick, then I went on the road, and I seemed to be okay, and then I got sick again, and it's just because my body, I was just not sleeping properly, all of these things. Nightmares, physical pain. The physical pain of grief is phenomenal. Like, my back was just shot. Like, my muscles were sore, everything hurt. Pain apparently in your ribs can come from that. Just physical pain, because I wasn't processing. I was just doing what I had to do, what was required to do. I gotta go on the road. I gotta get my mom moved. I gotta do this. I gotta do these things. And then when that's done, then you'll have time to think about it. And then as soon as that's all done, Christmas happened, and I was like, well, I'm not gonna think about it now, because it's a joyous time, and it was a distraction. And then January, and I think the boulder started picking up speed in the middle of the month. So my intention had been to just get back to podcasting in January, and then January turned into February, and now it's March, and I can't put it off anymore. And so this doesn't make all that much sense, but I just wanted you to know that it's not like I'm not trying. I just have never been this powerless before. And I will get better. Obviously, grief is an interesting thing. It comes out of nowhere. And I will get better. And I will be back. And if anything, it gives you more fight in the long run. But it's a critical hit. It's something that slows you down. It's something that makes you re-examine all the things you think about your own philosophy, all the things you think about your own determination of what you think success is, or what you think failure is, or what matters, what's valuable, what's not valuable, what are you clinging onto that you don't need, why are you obsessed with stuff that doesn't matter, and why aren't you obsessed with the things that do? Put your phone down, push your kid on the swing, that kind of thing, And I was always cognizant of that, but it definitely has resonated more. Like, time is not going to stop for you or anybody. It won't stop. It's going to keep coming. And you think you have more than you do. And we all know that. That's not true. But as you get older, and as you get into your middle age, which is what I have to accept that I am, when you get into your middle age, even if at 45 I'm only halfway there, even if I've got another 45 years, not all of those 45 years are going to be, what you want. So 10 years at least, maybe 15, it's not going to be what you want. So now I'm looking at 30 years. If the good tailwind, I got 30 years. And then I think about where I was 30 years ago, and I go, oh shit, I was like online as a human 30 years ago. Like I was a person. It's not 30 years ago wasn't some nebulous concept of when I was like 1 year old. No, I had like nearly had a driver's license at that point. And so it just makes you realize that although time isn't speeding up, the perception of it is that it is. And, all these markers in your life, all these things that happen, they just remind you of where you are. And I think that's the weird thing about it, because, my dad's problems are over. Every problem he's ever had is gone. He's never got to worry about anything. In fact, the only thing that's left is good things, because, you forgive a lot of, and I'm not saying but he was not a perfect person. Nobody is. But you forgive a lot of flaws when someone dies. You just look, you go, you know what? You just try and see it through the most positive way. And that's a good thing about grief. It can be, hopefully, if you're in that position. Not always, but if you're in that position, it can be. Grief is like, it's like, I posted this the other day, and I think it's weird because like even thinking about the positive things hurts. It's like someone reaching into your head and just squeezing your memories until they're painful, and that goes away. And grief, everyone says grief gets better, and it does. It does get better. It does get better. It's just, for me, I postponed the inevitable. Look. Not handling it is a very bad idea. Ignoring it is a very bad idea. Postponing it is probably second on that list of a bad idea. Like, get it over with. My mom handled it incredibly well. My mom is one of the strongest people I've ever known, and she just was like, it wasn't say it didn't, it devastated her, it devastated our family. But she just looked at it and was like, this is something that, my mom said to me once, and I've said this before on the podcast, you basically got this choice. You either stop or you keep going. That's it. When it really comes down to it, with everything, you stop or you keep going. Of course, we're going to keep going. Of course, you keep going. It's just sometimes getting the momentum back is hard. And so this is a long and involved way of apologizing to everyone who listens to the podcast, everyone who's been watching the podcast. We were doing great. We were, even with our weird studio problems, which, so I will explain that. So we were working at the studio, which we really liked. I can't remember what our first studio's name was. I can't remember what we called it, but we're Stab Central. I can't remember what it was. But we worked in the first studio, which we liked, but it didn't work out scheduling-wise. It was getting more and more difficult to book when we wanted to. And so for a while there, the wonderful Mikey Greenwood, who's not on this podcast, but he's still the producer. He's just not on this episode because it would be a little odd. But Mikey is the most wonderful person, and he's an exceptional human, and I'm very, very, very happy and proud to be working with him. But his apartment was just, I felt like we were intruding when we were in his space, and I didn't want that to be a thing. I wanted it to be more like, I didn't want to take up too much of his space. So then we were like, well, we got to find somewhere else. And so we went, because I enjoyed it. It was a fun place to be, and it was a lovely environment. But it was like, it just felt to me like intruding, and I didn't want to be that guy. And so I was like, okay, well, let's find somewhere else. And then I found another little studio that looked great on paper, that when we went to record, it was too difficult with the sound. So then we're like, what are we going to do? So, pardon me, sorry. I don't know what that is. Probably, is it black lung? Can you get black lung these days? That's what the hipsters will get. I got black lung. So I think we found a new place. And we'll release the two that we recorded. I'm very excited to put those out. The two guests that I've wanted to have for a long time. I'm going to put those out this week and next week. And then we're going to get back in the studio and just get back on the horse because I need to. But, it was one of those things where I figure I don't have a ton of fans, but the fans I have, you guys are amazing. And you understand, and I get it. And, I think that I needed to deal with this. And I haven't yet. But I will. I'm getting better. Thank God for the support system I have, because I wouldn't have made it. If you have anything you need to say to someone you care about, say it. If I can recommend, Also, if you can avoid having loved ones die, do that too. But yeah, yeah, because there's a lot. There's always going to be stuff you should have said, but try to get to as much of it as you can, or at least do your best. Share who you are, because the resource of who you are, the amount of who you are, ticks away every day, and then all of a sudden it's just not there anymore. So take care of yourselves, please. Take care of your loved ones. Hug your friends, hug your family. I'm not the first person who's had a relative die, and I won't be the last person. And unfortunately, it is a guarantee. Like I said, it's something that's going to happen to us all. But I can tell you that it sucks. And I can tell you that it really, if you're anything like me, it gives you a moment of pause, a moment of reflection. And yeah, sorry this podcast wasn't super funny, but I figured you guys, especially the ones who've been with me since the old days, and over the last few years, inconsistency's been the name of the game with this, and it's just, unfortunately, it's just been what it is. And I apologize for that, but this one was unavoidable. There's not really much I could do. I wouldn't have been much good to anybody, and I definitely didn't even have the time. I wasn't physically capable. I couldn't be in two places at once. So yeah, take care of each other, all right, and yeah, don't let the little shit steal your days. Don't let fighting online with people and getting upset over things that don't matter, and don't let that take your time away. All right, and because you don't have that much. Sorry, even if you're listening to this and you're 18, you don't have that much, because you honestly don't know how much you have, and it's probably less than you think, and it's definitely less than the people around you who care about you would like. Yeah. I guess that that's what's wrong for the last 4 months.